interested in philosophy when I was about 16 years old, going to the library in the public school that I went to in Nebraska. And I got these books on Plato and Aristotle and started reading them. I didn't really understand a lot of the details, but I was very interested in that. And religious and political questions, those kinds of inappropriate questions you're not supposed to talk about at dinner, attracted me when I was very, very young. And I had a great friend, and I would have these fantastic conversations with him. His father was a history professor and a philosophy professor at the local community college. But I decided to go to a seminary. I was a very religious young man, and I went to live at a Benedictine monastery for 2 years. And there were 3 degrees that were possible. One was philosophy, one was psychology, and one was theology. And I was interested in philosophy anyway, so I just started studying that. Became very, very interested. After 2 years, I went to another university that had a focus on continental philosophy. That's a philosophy that is emphasized in Europe, looks at the questions of the meaning of life, focuses on the history of philosophy. And I studied that parallel to religious studies. Then I went to graduate school in St. Louis, where I did work on actually a master's thesis on Karl Marx, became very interested in political philosophy, worked on Jürgen Habermas, who is a critical theorist. I decided after that I would go to Germany to do my doctorate. So I moved there, and I lived in Germany for 14 years in all. The doctorate took quite a long time. I worked while I was doing it, teaching English as a second language. And when I finished, I got a job as an editor and a translator. But I was working at a Max Planck Institute, editing texts that had still to do something with my interests in philosophy. These were in the areas of law, political science, and economics. And my job, basically 40 hours a week, was to read texts written by scholars from around Europe on those topics, and to improve the English, sometimes rewrite them, sometimes translate them. It's there that I did my first translation. One of the reasons I went to Germany to do the work was I thought I could get this niche in German philosophy and then translate some texts. And as it turns out, I did. A couple of my first major works in philosophy were of that sort. And actually I have a couple books here that I can grab that demonstrate that. The first book I translated was this one by Chris Matsavinos, who's a philosopher actually from Athens, Greece. It's called Naturalistic Hermeneutics, and it was published with Cambridge University Press. A few years later, I published another book. This was a translation of a book by Matthias Vogel, who's a German scholar. It's called Media of Reason, and it was published with Columbia University Press. I worked then further and was just, I guess quite focused on my academic career, and I edited a couple volumes that had to do with philosophy of technology and social theory. So one of them is called Traditions of Systems Theory. It was published by Routledge in about, what year? 2014, I believe. And it draws together works on a bunch of different theoreticians who call themselves systems theoreticians. Something to think about. The other and latest book that I did an edition of was Critical Theory and the Thought of Andrew Feenberg. Andrew Feenberg is a very famous philosopher of technology. And so those are some of the kinds of things I've done. One other piece here I have. This is called From Ego to Echo. And it really emphasizes one of my fundamental interests. Here I have a piece. I didn't edit this book, but I have an article in it. I've also written about 20 other articles. I've done numerous other translations. But this piece is about environmental politics, ecopolitics. And a lot of my work over the last 10 or so years has focused on the environment and issues of technology. So what I loved about philosophy was its breadth. I could question, the meaning of life, God's existence, politics, and look at all these disciplines and the entire history of thought. It allowed me to explore over the history of teaching this Buddhism and Hinduism and Confucianism and modern issues. The breadth of the discipline is what really attracted me to it, and that's something that I have to this day, I think this discipline really helps you to be well-rounded and think about all aspects of life.